As leaders, making friends in the workplace can be a funny thing. Well, okay, truthfully, making friends as adults is a really funny thing. It's odd. It feels weird. It's just so much different than when we were kids, where it just felt so obvious and natural. It just sort of happened. But there is so much benefit to taking those steps and prioritizing that effort that can have huge benefits, not only for us and our mental health, but also the organization as a whole. Even if we go to work to not make friends, which I've literally heard people say, my guest asks an important question to that. Do you go to work to make enemies? Of course not. So what can we do to connect and cultivate friendships to improve our employee experience? Let's find out. Hold on. I'm Russel Lolliker. I'm the host of Relationships at Work, the leadership mindset guide to creating a workplace we love. I'm a communications and leadership nerd with a couple of decades of experience and a heck of a heap of curiosity on how we can make the workplace a better place. And if you're a leader trying to understand and improve your impact on work culture and the employee experience, well, you're in the right place. Question though, what's a place you spend a lot of your time to help you think differently? Because we get rigid. We get into a mindset that doesn't shift often if we just stay into our regular routine. So we need to look to other places to sort of shift and tweak and rethink. For me, it's podcasts, it's newsletters, places that provide additional context and information beyond my day-to-day. If you're the same, I want to invite you to check out my weekly Raw Note. Yes, there is a newsletter that's a companion piece to my podcast. It's just a quick little newsletter that digs into topics that are top of mind or topical for me. Just recently, I've shared the value of communicating values to everyone, how big events without small gestures are just hollow efforts, and why emojis need to be part of our regular workplace communication, or we're just kidding ourselves about inclusivity. That's just the last couple, and I am excited as hell for the ones that are on the way. So if you don't want to miss out, just go to my website, relationshipsatworkshow.com, go to free interview templates. It's right there. It's a tab in the middle. You sign up, go through all the steps, and there you go. But before you do that, I don't want you to stop what you're doing right now. I want to talk about workplace friendships, because they're always an interesting conversation. What's too much? What's unprofessional? What's too formal or informal? Should we be Facebook friends? I've had these conversations a lot over the years, and it's always worth having because you can't have strong relationships at work without considering that level of friendship or colleagueship. I personally haven't had a lot of those relationships that transcended work. Sure, I've had friends, work friends, where we go to the pub after work or hang out at lunch, but going to a work event now and again, okay, yeah, I did that. But rarely did it get to a level of, what are you doing Friday night? Want to come over? Want to hang out? Maybe back when I worked in restaurants, but back then working in a restaurant was like my whole existence. So it wasn't like I did anything that didn't involve that job. But moving into the corporate work, yeah, no, it's a lot different. And you know what? It's what works for you. But how do you start? It's not easy for everyone. Making friends is hard, especially for those fearful of a misstep. And then you have to work with these people even if you screw up. So what do you do? My guest has written a book on how to do it and created tools to support our efforts. I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I would lie if I didn't say communication didn't come up. It always does. So let's go talk to Kat about making friends at work. Here we go. And on the show today, we have Kat Vellos. And here is why she is awesome. She's a facilitator and keynote speaker and author of the book, We Should Get Together, The Secrets of Cultivating Better Friendships. Did I mention she also drew the darn thing too? She's created tools to help with that friendship building. Should mention that. The Better Than Small Talk Conversation starter cards, or the Better Conversations kit. You can check out both those tools online. She's a former user experience designer working for Slack and Pandora. Super curious about that, especially how it relates to building friendships. And she's a founder of the Bay Area Black Designers, the Bay Area's largest professional development community for Black UX and product designers. Did I mention she's also been featured in the New York Times, NPR, TEDx, and more and more and more and more? And she's here. Hello, Kat.
Hello, Russell. It's great to be with you today.
You too. Kat, I know we talked before we started recording and you knew this was coming, so I have to ask it, which is, what's your best or worst employee experience?
Yeah, it's funny that we're calling it an employee experience because while I experienced it as an employee experience, there's also a distinction between work and service. So
Mhm.
when I was in my early 20s, I did a couple of years of AmeriCorps, which for those who don't know is national service. So it's
Okay.
like the Peace Corps, but it's domestic. And I did 2 years of AmeriCorps up in the Pacific Northwest. And it was a life-changing, beautiful experience. And my AmeriCorps director to this day is the best boss I ever had. And the reason why I clarify at the beginning to say work and service, she was really big about this. She was like, "This is not a job, this is service." And I think that she really instilled that in all 50 members of our team. And it's really informed the way that I actually approach work ever since. And I think that is something that everybody should get to experience, actually. Like
So
how to be
what
of service in that way.
I have to ask, so what made her such a great leader or a boss? Was it because she was sort of attaching your work to the value of what you were doing?
Absolutely. Like the understanding that when you're in a role of service, you are there to give, you are there to share the best of your skills and abilities to improve the lives of others. That's really what makes it different. And the way she clarified it was saying, when you're in a job, sometimes you're like, what's in it for me? Which is unfortunately not the best framework to be in, to also be thinking and prioritizing the people that you're actually there to serve.
It's so funny how you talk about there's such a distinction when, and I'm sure we both can agree on this, there
Mhm.
shouldn't be.
There shouldn't
Like
be. Yeah. Mhm. There
I
shouldn't.
I find it so interesting that it's sort of this service idea of a bigger calling, helping others. And yet so many people that stay in organizations and have the highest retention are also echoing the same things of, I feel a connection to the work. I feel like there's value in what I do. And yet, and yet, today we're talking about workplace friendships. So curious about this. So I have to start off with defining things. I've found myself having to do this early on in the podcast where we talk about these topics, but maybe it means something a little different to my guest, or maybe it might need something different to the listener. So
Mhm.
before we get going, can we talk about when you say
Mhm.
workplace friendships, what is the look and feel of that type of relationship?
I see it in a couple of different ways. So one is a colleagueship, and the other is a friendship that transcends the workplace. It's in the workplace, but it also kind of goes outside of the workplace too. And so colleagueship is what I offer to folks who say, I don't go to work to make friends. I came here to work. And it's okay, great. Let's talk about how to have a healthy colleagueship. It's often quite similar to a healthy friendship. And then a workplace friendship or a work friend is someone that you are legitimately friends with. And it is more likely that whether you both work there or not, this is a true friend. And you're probably going to stay a part of each other's lives.
Will that blend into personal as well? I mean, because we talk
More
more
likely.
like,
Yeah,
okay,
that's the distinction between the 2, is the friendship that it happens to be in the workplace and may, like I said, transcend the workplace, means that
right.
if one of you leaves the company, you're probably still gonna be friends. If you both leave the company, you're probably still gonna be friends, and your friendship may even take on a deeper dimension because it doesn't have all of the workplace professionalism stuff to navigate. But a colleagueship is, again, what I typically offer to folks who say, "Well, I don't want my friends in my personal life." And it's, "Okay, well, you can still have healthy, friendly workplace relationships too," you know? Like the quip I make, which is like a quip, but not really, is to say, if you say you don't go to work to make friends, and it's okay, fine. Do you go to work to make enemies? Hopefully, no. So let's say, how can you have really healthy, positive relationships at work as well while still keeping it professional?
And those people that go to work not to make enemies, but also not to sort of build stronger relationships, they're sort of head down,
Mhm.
doing their job, nine to five. I'll use that cliche. But I'm just trying to figure out, is there degrees of this friendship?
Certainly.
Because we talk about the two that you provide, but there's also that person that doesn't go for friendships, but isn't looking to alienate people either. So is it a degree thing?
Certainly, yeah, just like in real life, how you have some acquaintances. So on the spectrum of relationships, there's friendly strangers, so people you recognize by face, but you probably not had conversations with, but you might nod at each other. And then there's acquaintances who you'd make some chit chat with, or closer acquaintances or casual friends that you might every now and then chat with longer, have a deeper, I don't know, maybe a coffee or something with. And then there's good friends, and then there's great friends, and there's best friends, and so it's like these rings of connection. And this is all from the research of Robin Dunbar, and so that can also have a workplace component too.
Why, Kat? Why should we be pursuing better relationships, better connections, better friendships at work? What is, why should we do this?
Right. So there's a lot of different reasons. One, that I'm a very practical person, and just on a purely pragmatic level, the fact that when we are in adulthood, the aside from whoever you live with, the people that you're probably going to spend the most time with is going to be your coworkers. So there's a really great chart that illustrates this from our time use, our World in Data's time use survey, and it shows that when they look at the line for how much time we spend with friends, with colleagues, with family, etc., by yourself, alone as well, the line with friends typically peaks at around 18, and then it drops until 35, and it stays low pretty much until the end of life. The line with coworkers rises around the 20s and stays high until you're about 55 or 60 through the end of the chart. And so just on a purely pragmatic level, you are going to be spending more time because you got to go to work 40 plus hours a week with these coworkers. And so you might as well invest in having meaningful, positive, uplifting relationships with the people that you're going to spend the most time with. Not only because it's pleasant, but also because, as we all know, if you have stressful or toxic or unhealthy relationships, they take a lot of toll on the body, your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health. So it is in both of your best interest, honestly, to try to make that as conducive to positive, healthy connection as you can, because you're gonna spend a lot of time there, and that's gonna affect your health and well-being long term.
So from a bigger picture perspective, if
Mhm.
we do this more proactively, more
Yeah.
intentionally, and I'm kind of curious as to some of the steps you'd suggest in doing that to somebody that may not be as, oh, I don't know, extroverted, or may not just come as naturally to them. But what are the impacts to culture when
Mhm.
you start making those connections, making them more meaningful than just transactional? What is the benefit to a culture at large?
Definitely. And I wanna clarify, I'm not an extrovert, and I speak openly about this in my book and in my talks, like, I'm an introvert, and this isn't the domain of extroverts to want to have meaningful platonic relationships and positive platonic relationships. I would even argue that because introverts are more impacted by social engagement, we actually want them to be the strongest, the most, because otherwise we're gonna feel drained regardless, so it might as well be for a really good reason. So with that, the impact on culture is profound because what we know is that when workers feel more belonging at work, more connection, when they have a best friend at work, they're more likely to produce higher quality work. They're more likely to do, and part of the reason for that is because you want to do good work for your buddies at work. You know, you want to uplift things you're trying to accomplish together. I know that you know all of this as well. And then retention is also increased when people feel a sense of connection or when they have a best friend at work or even a good friend at work. So it is a positive work experience because what it creates is this like upward trending spiral where everybody is doing well together and improving the work of each other and also improving the retention. And so all of that just contributes to a work environment where the best work and innovation can happen. Is like when we don't have it, the biggest impact is on psychological safety. When people
Right.
don't feel like their ideas are going to be listened to or even respected in a meeting, they're unlikely to share them because that doubt of, am I going to be ridiculed? Is someone going to say something snarky to me? You know, it holds people back from sharing their ideas or asking really important questions that could save a project from being totally like shipwrecked. And so it's really significant to have a culture where people do have that psychological safety, and it doesn't mean that everybody's best friends and they're going to cheers at night, you know, whatever. but it's but it's significant to have a place where people do feel a sense of acceptance and safety as a baseline.
I think of maybe so we'll call them Steve. I don't know why,
Sure.
but there's that person that's not lives and works in a silo, loves working and living in that silo. But I've worked in organizations where, do you know what Steve does? Do you like? I know he's been here for 15 years, but nobody talks to him. He doesn't talk to anybody. And how many problems could be solved when we find out actually he's the person that fixes that problem because we know Steve. We know what he does. We don't have to have the deepest friendship or relationship,
Mhm.
but we have familiarity. And
Yeah.
I feel how well that could help the culture of an organization because, as you said, it is personalized. There are introverts, there are extroverts, and that's fine. But we need to know who we work with. And that can only come with some level of relationship, friendship being built and that spectrum sort of thing.
Yeah, and I've met Steve before. I kinda have a sense of who this person is, and the funny thing about it is even if Steve isn't in work to become besties with every person there, chances are what Steve is also hoping for is some level of respect, some level of visibility, some sense of being valued, some sense of being trusted, and to feel like his voice matters, right? And those are all things that we all probably want when we go to work and that are present in healthy workplace relationships just as much as they're present in healthy friendships.
Fair. So let's take a few steps here, Kat.
Yeah.
How do you cultivate friendships? How do you go down this path of not only starting, but also cultivating those friendships? Because it's not a checkbox. This is relationship building. Where would you even start?
Well, when you ask about where to start with friendships, I'll start by explaining the model that I have in the book, which is
Mm,
really just about adding friendship to your life and your personal life, and then I'll talk about how you can apply that in the workplace. So, there's 4 I call them seeds of connection in the book, and there are 4 main attributes that make a friendship more likely to grow. So, they include proximity, frequency, compatibility, and commitment. And the more of those you have with somebody, the more likely you are to be friends with them or to be able to maintain a friendship somewhat easily. And in the workplace, you have some frequency because you're both showing up to the same place. But even if you're virtual and you're just in Zoom or Slack together, you're showing up over and over again to the same place. If you do have any hybrid or in person work, there's a physical proximity as well that you may share. There is if there's someone in the workplace that you feel quite compatible with, you really like their energy, they have a great attitude, every time you have to collaborate together, you're like, "Oh, great, I'm so glad I get to work with them," or they, crack the best jokes, whatever it is, you really admire or appreciate them. There's some compatibility there, and if that's mutual, then the next thing you can do is to say, "Well, what does it look like from a commitment standpoint?" The commitment that you have to each other in the workplace is really different than what you might have in your personal life, but you're showing up to work and you might demonstrate your commitment by keeping your word when you tell them, "Hey, I'm going to get you this document by 4 p.m. on Tuesday." You show your commitment by letting them know verbally, "I really loved collaborating with you on this last project, Russell. You really knocked it out of the park in that, presentation." And saying, "Do you want to go get a celebratory coffee?" Or doing something additional that shows, "I really appreciate you and I want to spend time with you. And I want you to know that you matter to me."
Where can we misstep in this? Because I know people that will even assume a friendship has been established and it hasn't. Or, oh, we're all friends here. I'm like, oh no, we're not. Like, I've never liked you. Well, but there is that assumption of connection when it's like, how can we misstep this process? Because it seems pretty straightforward and makes a lot of sense.
Mhm. Well, as you described, I was thinking too when you said in that example of someone says, "Oh, we're all friends here," and you're like, "Not."
Mm.
I think there can be a misstep in that particular case I'm thinking of specifically, where someone has over assumed what the closeness is without ever maybe checking to see how the other person feels or the other people in the team feel. That often can manifest in the example of you know, the team lead saying, "Oh, we're all gonna go to karaoke together or whatever because 'cause we're all chummy with each other." And there's somebody in that team who maybe feels really isolated or alienated, and they're like, "Oh god, this is gonna be so uncomfortable and awkward, and I can't escape, and I have to pretend like I'm happy here." So I think there's some listening that's necessary, particularly in any situation where the manager or people lead is going to be making decisions on behalf of the group as far as what friendship activity the group is gonna do together. It's like, maybe find out how people are feeling and what would help them feel supported. And then on a more one-to-one level, I think it can be useful to simply talk to people and find out, ask them questions, lead with curiosity to find out. So how connected do you feel here at work? Do you like making friends at work? Have you made friends at work before? I had this conversation once with a colleague, and she had told me that since moving to the city a few years before, 100% of her friends had come from work, not only in the job that we were currently at, but at her previous job as well. And that was interesting to me. I assumed it would be some of her friends, but she said all of her friends had come through the workplace. And she, liked to stay friends with people after she left the job. And so my awareness, simply by asking her, "What has it been like for you making friends since you moved here?" was to learn that finding friendship in the workplace was a high priority for her. Very different, right? Than if she had
Mm.
said, "Oh, work is work, and most of my friends are from college or from grad school or from my Pilates team or whatever my Pilates studio, whatever it is." You learn a lot by just asking people broad, general questions of, "What's it been like for you making friends since you moved to the city?" Or, "What's it been like for have you made friends in the workplace here?" By finding out what has maybe happened for them in the recent past, you can get some information about where they might be in the present.
Can this be a slippery slope? The reason I ask this is I can make friends, you've made friends, but
Mhm.
sometimes it gets almost to the area of familiarity where it's almost unprofessional,
Hmm.
where it gets to the level of, okay, we get it.
Yeah.
You're close friends. And it can having that familiarity where it can almost be too, or am I getting too sensitive around the idea that people work differently? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, and I say this because I hate the word professionalism. It is
Mhm.
one of my least favorite words because it puts this barrier up against inclusivity and diversity. If
Mhm.
you're not this type of way, you're not professional, then this. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if this level of friendship can dip its toe into that area and go a little too far.
With the professionalism
Yeah.
expectations?
Yeah.
More than likely, where I see it go not so well is with people not pursuing friendship because they are trying to perform professionalism.
Mm. I'm with
They leave a lot of chips on the table because they're just, like, too afraid to try or too afraid to reach out or too afraid to do anything that might, "Oh, well, I have to be professional," and holding themselves back from building what might be a really positive seed for friendship there. Mhm. And the
so
other thing too I wanna say, 'cause it comes up not just in this conversation, but whatever I'm talking with folks about, to having the courage to see if this other person wants a friendship too. And one of the things that we can do, if you don't wanna make the other person feel like they're on the spot or question, like, where is these questions coming from? What is your motive for asking me this thing that feels a little personal? If you lead first with some information about yourself, if you disclose something that sets the context for them,
mm,
that is a massive way to disarm any of the awkwardness or doubt or questioning about, like, where this is coming from. And it doesn't mean you have to be like, "Oh, I've been having a hard time making friends. Can I talk to you about it?" And then they're like, "Whoa, this isn't therapy." That it doesn't have to be that deep. Don't do it that way, right? Like, instead you can say, "I just listened to a really interesting podcast about friendship in adulthood," or friendship in the workplace. Or I just read a really interesting article or book about friendship, and I've been thinking about it a lot more. Do you have a few minutes? I'd love to chat with you about it. Or when someone says what have you been up to lately? You can share that that's something you've been thinking about, or what's been on your mind lately. There's so many default questions we use in conversation, and we have a script with a bunch of default answers, but you don't have to do the script. You can share something that kind of opens a door to that conversation, discloses that this is something that matters to you, and notice, pay attention. Do they bite? Do they respond with curiosity? Do they back away? Do they come forward? What their responses will tell you you may or may not be able to broach this conversation with them and see if this is something they want to talk about or explore too.
You mentioned proximity earlier,
Mhm.
but the world has changed quite a bit because we did mention remote work as
Yeah.
well. So
Mhm.
technology and new ways of working are certainly factors that a lot of organizations are going through. How do you build that connection and perpetuate that connection while not sitting beside each other or
Mhm.
walking by their office every day?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways to think about proximity. I actually did a post on Instagram about this a while ago, really looking at the different forms of what proximity can mean. So, in the most default definition of that, we're talking physical, geographical space, but there's energetic proximity, there's personality proximity, there's collaboration proximity, there's spiritual proximity. There's these different ways in which we feel close to people. Even the fact that in the English language, we use the word close to mean things beyond physical closeness,
Yeah.
right? So, in that way, you can think about who you are proximal to in your work, even if you're both remotely working at your desk in your home office, right?
For me, I generally I don't know why I do this. So I've been in teams, but I've also been not having teams, but having relationships with others and that far reach outside
Yeah.
my portion of the organization. And I'll do little messages like, I saw you do this the other day or this presentation, unbelievably, blah, blah, blah. Like just little seeds.
Yeah.
Or did you come back from how was your vacation? Because I knew they had mentioned 2 months ago that they went to Colorado.
Yeah.
So I was like, did you have a great time? Like just those little, it doesn't need to be all the time, but those little check-ins,
Mhm.
which really help perpetuate a friendship of I was thinking about you.
Exactly.
It doesn't need to be anything deeper than just how were your kids on the first day of school? Because I know you have kids, even though I don't. I know
Mhm.
you do, and that's a stressful time. And it doesn't need to be any longer than say two little sentences, and that's it. You don't have to talk to them again for a week. If they're not if they're not part of your regular flow, but you're still maintaining the friendship. And I say regular flow as in your workflow, as in your regular occurrences within your day-to-day work. But
Mhm.
maybe you met them 3 months ago and you really hit it off on that one project that you're not working on anymore, but you still need to perpetuate that friendship because it matters to you.
Yeah.
Anything else you would suggest as a way to sort of just, it doesn't have to be grand gestures.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be grand gestures. I love your example of those 1 to 2 sentence check-ins that let somebody know that you're thinking of them and you remember. Another thing that you can do that's not a grand gesture, but just small and not also too demanding on your time, and this is something I used to do at Slack, is that I would make sure that I had a monthly or weekly recurring lunch with somebody who's outside of my department.
Mm.
So the prompt for myself was set this reminder to invite somebody to have lunch with me, and I would invite someone that I normally would never work with or necessarily have a one-on-one lunch with. Like, maybe there was someone else who was in the department, we knew who each other were, but our work did not bring us together, and so I might be like, "Hey, like, I do these lunches with different people outside of my department. I have a couple dates coming up. Do you want to come to lunch with me on one of these days?" Almost every single time someone said yes when they were invited. People love to be invited. My old TEDx talks about invitations because it's a really meaningful way to open the door to a connection. And so we would have a lunch. There was no expectation that like, okay, now we got to make it like a every day or every Tuesday thing or whatever. But it was just a nice way to form a closer connection to someone who is also not in the muck of your like day-to-day stress or anything like that. So often our conversations went many more divergent ways than if you have lunch with just the colleague you sit next to, where you're more likely to talk about your day-to-day projects and talk about work. When you go to someone who you have less of that default script of things to talk about, it opens up so many more doors to interesting conversations.
And something I also want, I love that by the way, because I love the intention of it, having reminders in a calendar to go, you should go make friends today. Like really just a way of just making it part of your day to day. I remember talking to an executive not too long ago, and they asked me, how do they listen, connect with other employees? And I'm like, who are you connecting with now? He's like, Oh, his two administrative assistants. That's all he ever talked to. I'm like,
Wow.
you are self-isolating. It's
Wow.
your fault. Go walk a different floor. Go say hi to a front end staff. Like, just get out of the bubble you've man-made created for yourself
Mhm.
and go. So that story reminded me of your story reminded me of that, just the
Mhm.
intention and the purposefulness of getting out of your day-to-day and your regular faces and build those relationships and friendships, because it can't happen organically if you just
Oh,
sit at your
yeah.
desk and go, people need to talk to me more.
No, no, it's usually not gonna happen that way. And the other thing too, I will say, is if somebody wants to try this and you're wondering, "Oh, I'm not sure where to begin." If you work at a company that has any employee resource groups or ERGs, like,
Mm.
this is a prime real estate place to go make those friends, because through these affinity groups, you know that you already have something in common with the other people who are there, whether it's like the so I was in all of them. I was in, like, the women's ERG, the LGBTQIA+ ERG. I was also in the, ERG for people of color or Black folks, you know? And so those are spaces where there are other people in the company who are likely also looking for a connection, or they wouldn't have joined the ERG in the first place. And so if they're I remember one really amazing friend I made at work where we had both attended a workshop that was facilitated by the ERG. And during the workshop, we were paired for a little buddy activity. We had to partner up and do a little 15-minute activity together. But we had a really great conversation. And so we decided to keep in touch afterwards and follow up with each other on this particular practice we were going to be doing. And we ended up staying friends for the next year. And it was awesome because we would have these monthly check ins, be like, how is it going with that thing? And we had this meaningful thing of connection that happened outside of our day-to-day work while still at work, and
Mhm.
it was just a wonderful experience because I would have never met this person otherwise if I didn't go to that workshop, and it was just so cool that we were both willing to say, "Let's keep the conversation going after this, hour and a half workshop is over." And so just pay attention to the people that are around you, get involved, and then see how you can continue to support somebody else and also ask for support. And so, like in that example I just gave, it was really meaningful to have this person that I was, cheerleading for his projects, he was cheerleading for mine. And it was just so nice to be like, there's someone else who cares about what I'm doing who isn't even a part of my day to day work. Like, we don't have to care about each other, we choose to care about each other. And it was just really, really lovely. So I highly recommend getting involved in the ERGs. If there isn't one, start one. I don't know.
The mention of ERGs makes me think about the organization at large, because we're talking about, we need to do this. We can do this. We can be empowered to do this. But what is the role of the organization in creating an environment that allows these healthy relationships? What do they need to be doing?
Well, as we talked about before, ensuring psychological safety is the number one most important thing, because without that, it's going to be pretty hard to build anything else, much less healthy friendships, healthy colleagueships, healthy teams, etc. Psychological safety is the number one most important thing. And so if a company doesn't have that, they need to focus on fixing that before they try to like layer on icing. You need a cake first. You can't just come with the ice. And so with that, modeling the behaviors that are expected from people who are there from the highest levels of leadership down. Because it doesn't mean anything if the company has a value of kindness, if the leadership is routinely unkind to people or in like meetings saying things that cut people down, right? Because people watch what you do more than what you say. So I would say definitely the company has an obligation to ensure that whoever is in leadership is exemplifying, like actually truly trying to be of service in that way I talked about before, like showing these values, demonstrating them, and setting the bar for really what that should look like in day to day practice. What I also mentioned is before, whenever there's an opportunity to do a culture building activity, I think it's so important for whoever the manager is that's organizing that to talk to their staff first to find out what would be meaningful for them. A lot of assumptions get made about what fun looks like or what connection looks like without anybody ever being asked if that's something that would be fun or meaningful or connecting for them. And sometimes it can lead to the opposite. It can be isolating and lonely and like awkward and uncomfortable and not at all the way that they want to connect with their colleagues or spend time in the workplace. So, listening is a key component that anybody who is shepherding their staff or taking care of folks needs to think about listening first. And then if you do hear that there is a need or a request, be of support, be of service. How can you help that person get that need met? Whether it's within their immediate team, an adjacent team, an ERG, like sponsoring them to start a club, whatever it might be of support and service so that if they have the courage to open up and say, I need help with this,
Mm.
have the dedication and commitment to follow through and help them make that happen.
It goes back to the idea of defining things, because you've mentioned connection, but connection, my definition of connection versus your
Exactly.
definition of connection, can be very, very different.
Yeah.
And if you're not listening and not defining it on a personal level, let's stop talking about diversity, equity, inclusivity if we're not looking to actually define what they mean for each individual in their world and how they show up at work. I find that very interesting that we will talk about DEIB, but we won't do the steps that are needed for DEIB, which includes defining, listening, and so forth. So communication seems to be the most important key here. It seems to be, through everything you've mentioned, it's the DNA of communication, good and bad, whether it's going
Hmm.
to build this relationship. Huh. I'm just trying to think about, like, those, not everybody assumes they're good at communication because they've been talking since a young age, but most aren't, because they're just because you can write an email doesn't mean you're a good communicator. So, is there any tips you would suggest from a friendship creation level of tone, approach? Where can communication be leveraged the best?
Mm. What a lovely question. It is all about communication. And I think, as you know, communication has two parts. It's the part where you do talking and there's the part where you do the listening, and the way you listen
Mhm.
also communicates what kind of communicator you are and how much you want to connect with the other person. So I can tell if you and I were having a Monday morning chat, oh, how was your weekend? And you can tell that I'm distracted, I'm multitasking, I'm scrolling on my phone at the same time, I'm listening to you, but I'm not really listening to you. That is communicating something about the type
Mm.
of connection I'm wanting to build with you, versus if I'm listening attentively, if I'm responding with follow-up questions, if I remember a detail you shared in the past, if I ask a meaningful uh, add on or share a story that adds on to what you're building. Like, you can tell that I'm not only listening to you actively, but I'm looking to add on to the connection that we had from the first question by bringing more to it, right? And so I would say paying close attention to the way that other people are listening and responding to you. And then also thinking about the way that you listen and respond to others. So, for example, one of the reasons why I created the Better Conversations calendar is because when we use the script of small talk chit chat, like the default questions, it can be unclear whether we're really trying to listen or if we're just saying the thing that we think we're
Mm.
supposed to say. So it looks like, oh, now we're having pleasantries. And when you ask a different question or you ask the question in a different way, it makes it more clear that you are here to listen, that you are actually curious, right? And so thinking about the way that you use questions as a doorway to connection, acknowledging that the type of question you choose and the way you ask it communicates a lot, regardless of whatever the answer to the question is.
Oh, so agreed. Conflict is a part of that, though, too, Kat. In any friendship, any healthy relationship, there's going to be conflict. The difference is, at work, you still have to work with these people.
Mhm.
You still have to interact and engage and deliver with these people.
Yeah.
How do you navigate conflict even while trying to maintain these relationships?
hmm So conflict resolution is a skill. It's a life skill, and everybody needs to have it. Because if even in your personal life, if you throw away every relationship at the very first slightest conflict, you're either gonna be lonely or you're gonna have to spend a lot of time starting new relationships from scratch. So, being able to solve a problem or resolve a conflict and move forward is so significant, and the that's one of the sideways gifts of the workplace is because you have to keep seeing each other. You have a perfect training ground to practice those skills of clarity making and clearing misunderstandings and asking for a repair with someone, like all of these things that you need to do, probably in your friendships at home, probably in your relationship. Like you will need to practice those same kinds of things in the workplace with the added, I would say, added pressure of needing to do it in a setting where the stakes are a bit higher in some ways because your income is tied to that place, right? Whether you can stay there. And so, yes, great. And if conflict resolution is not something that someone feels comfortable with, I would highly encourage them to get into a setting, whether it's a workshop or an online class or a group program or something where they have a safe place to practice those skills before they need to be using them in the heat of the moment. In the heat of the moment, it is still hard to remember the things that you practice in the workshop. But because you will hopefully have learned a framework for how to approach those conflicts, things that you can say, things to definitely not say, are all things that will help you in the moment to do that. So, for example, I read an article just this morning actually that was talking about better conversations. Obviously, I'm a communication junkie. I really am into like studying these topics all the time. One of the researchers was stating that one of the mistakes people make when they have conflict is that they will come in hot right off the bat with the thing that's wrong, right? So if I see, Steve in the hallway, I know we're just picking on Steve today.
Or
If I
Steve. Yeah.
Poor Steve, if I see Steve in the hallway and I'm just like, "Hey, Steve, there was a typo on the front page of the slide deck." He's gonna be like, "WTF? What's your problem?" Like, coming in
Right.
hot. He's good morning. And so thinking about how do you open the conversation and how do you say, we need to fix something, even if it's urgent, but I'm still caring about you as a person. I'm not going to treat you like trash just because you made a mistake or I feel like you did something wrong.
Before I get to the final question, I do have to ask you, Kat, how has workplace friendships you've cultivated, either through writing your book, either
Mhm.
through your own experience, enriched your life? How has those workplace friendships made life a little better for you?
Oh, they made life demonstrably better. They're actually the center of my life. And have been for so many years because friendship is something that has always been the most true form of acceptance, like all the like DEIB things, right? It's like the inclusivity, the belonging, definitely diversity, all of those things. It's love, it's connection, it's dedication, it's playfulness, it's curiosity. All of the things that make life great are present in my friendships. And this is a big part of the reason why I chose to write this book was when I saw that we were in the middle of a loneliness epidemic and millions of Americans were just living without friendship. I was like, I don't want that for them and I don't want that for me. And I don't want anyone to have to struggle with this. So let's talk about how we can make this better for everyone.
Kat,
Mhm.
what's one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
Yeah, one very easy thing that you can do that will definitely improve the quality of your workplace friendships, your colleagueships, whatever you want to call them, is gratitude. So think of somebody right now that you appreciate in the workplace and send them a message, just letting them know that you appreciate them. Whether it's for something that they said in the last meeting that you keep thinking, man, I'm so glad that they said that. I really appreciate it. Or whether it's the way that they consistently show up for you and your team and how whatever energy or attitude they bring that you really admire or appreciate about them, whatever it is, pick something specific and let them know. Don't just be like, hey, Jenny, you rock. Tell Jenny why she rocks. Tell her specifically what it is about her that you appreciate. Whoever it might be, think of someone right now that you work with, that you appreciate, and tell them why.
Even Steve.
Even
Even
Steve,
Steve.
especially Steve. Yeah. I feel like Steve's curmudgeonly because people have not told him they appreciate him. Let him know.
You've got so much love to give, and yet no one is coming out to say hi to Steve. That is Kat Vellos. She is a facilitator, a keynote speaker, and author of the book We Should Get Together: The Secret of Cultivating Better Friendships. And she's created some amazing tools to help us with that. Thank you so much for your time, Kat. That is it. That is all. That is another episode of Relationships at Work, the Leadership Mindset Guide to Creating a Workplace we love. I'm Russell. Thanks again for joining me. Always really appreciate your time and your effort in prioritizing your leadership journey. Because truthfully, if you're just going to work and you're just putting blinders on and doing the job, you're not really a leader. You're just doing the job description. You're not actually making a difference for your team. So thank you for being the kind of person that's thinking outside the rigidness of your job description and really about how your impact is on your work culture and the employee experience. If you found value in these episodes, I have a favor to ask. If you could go to Apple or Spotify and look at their ratings and review section and leave us a rating and review, it really helps the show. It helps us grow. It helps us be found by others when they type in employee experience, leadership, such things. Anyway, really appreciate your efforts in doing that as well. Thank you. You have a great day.